In the heart of a steamy South American jungle, a renowned explorer is found strangled with a silk scarf, his discovery of a lost temple's map threatening to unravel secrets of greed, rivalry, and betrayal. Enter Miss Jane Marple, an unassuming spinster with a razor-sharp mind, as she navigates a camp of suspects, each with a motive, each hiding a truth. From a stolen scarf to a muddy boot print, she weaves together clues to unmask a cunning killer in a race against time. Will she unravel the jungle's deadly mystery before it claims another life? Chapter 1. The Jungle's Secret. The air hung heavy with moisture in the South American jungle, where the relentless drone of insects mingled with the distant cries of unseen creatures. Beneath a canopy of ancient trees, the expedition's base camp sprawled in a small clearing, its canvas tents weathered by weeks of heat and rain. Miss Jane Marple, an unexpected guest in this wild place, sat on a folding stool outside the main tent, her knitting needles moving with quiet precision. Her white hair was neatly pinned, her cotton dress pristine despite the humidity, and her mild blue eyes surveyed the scene with deceptive placidity. She had come at the behest of her old friend, Sir Henry Clithering, a retired Scotland Yard commissioner who now dabbled in funding scholarly ventures. This particular venture, however, had taken a grim turn. The previous night, Dr. Ernest Baxter, the expedition's lead explorer, had been found dead in his tent. A silk scarf, embroidered with vivid parrots, was knotted tightly around his throat, his face frozen in a ghastly mask of surprise. The discovery had sent a shiver through the camp, transforming its atmosphere from one of scholarly ambition to one of suspicion. The local authorities, a single harried constable from a nearby village, lacked the resources to investigate a crime of such complexity. Sir Henry, present to oversee his investment, had immediately turned to Miss Marple, whose reputation for unraveling human mysteries far exceeded her unassuming appearance. "It's a bad business, Jane," Sir Henry said, mopping his brow with a handkerchief as he joined her under the canvas awning. His voice was low, his eyes troubled. Baxter was a brilliant man, if a touch arrogant. Someone in this camp wanted him dead, and I'd wager it's tied to his discovery. Miss Marple's needles paused briefly. "A discovery, you say?" Her tone was gentle, inviting confidence, much like the chats she had with villagers over tea in St. Mary Mead. "A lost temple," Sir Henry replied. Baxter believed he'd pinpointed its location, a place of untold archaeological value. He was close to proving it too. "That's what brought us here, funded by Reginald Hawthorne. You'll meet him soon enough." Miss Marple nodded, her mind already sifting through possibilities. A discovery of such magnitude could stir envy, greed, or fear. Motives she knew well from the quiet scandals of her village. She glanced around the camp, noting its inhabitants. There was Diego Alvarez, the local guide, a lean man with dark eyes that darted nervously as he sharpened a machete. Dr. Clara Wentworth, the expedition's botanist, sat apart, scribbling in a notebook, her angular face set in concentration. Reginald Hawthorne, the sponsor, stood near the cook fire, his portly frame clad in an incongruously fine linen suit, barking orders at a young porter. And then there was Victor Slade, a rival explorer, whose tall figure lounged against a tent pole, his smile too polished for the rugged setting. "They're a varied lot," Miss Marple remarked, her voice soft, "and not one of them looks entirely at ease." Sir Henry chuckled grimly. "You've a knack for seeing through people, Jane. Baxter's death has them all on edge. The constable's taken statements, but they're useless. Everyone claims to have been asleep when it happened. Miss Marple resumed her knitting, the soft click of her needles a counterpoint to the jungle's hum. People are rarely as asleep as they claim, Henry. A camp like this, so small, so close. Someone saw something, even if they don't yet know it. As the morning sun climbed, casting dappled shadows through the leaves, Miss Marple began her quiet observations. Diego Alvarez moved with the efficiency of a man born to the jungle, but his hands trembled slightly as he worked. She recalled a saint, Mary Mead, farmhand, steady in his tasks but undone by a hidden grudge. Dr. Wentworth's sharp glance met hers briefly before returning to her notes, her fingers gripping the pencil a shade too tightly. Mr. Hawthorne's booming laugh rang out as he spoke to the porter, but his eyes flicked toward the others, watchful and wary. Victor Slade, however, was the most intriguing. He caught Miss Marple's gaze and offered a charming nod, his teeth flashing in a smile that reminded her of a young man in her village who sold dubious tonics with equal charisma. Sir Henry leaned closer. "The scarf bothers me, Jane. It's not the sort of thing you'd expect out here. Silk, embroidered, costly. Doesn't fit with the camp's rough and tumble." Miss Marple's eyes twinkled. "Indeed, Henry. It's the sort of thing one might find in a London boutique, or perhaps in the luggage of someone with refined tastes. We shall have to ask about it." The camp's routine resumed, though the air crackled with unease. The porter, Juan, a slight man with a cautious demeanor, served coffee, his eyes downcast. Miss Marple thanked him softly, noting his reluctance to linger. Fearful, she thought. But of whom? She resolved to speak with him later, away from prying ears. As the morning wore on, Sir Henry outlined the suspects. Diego, the guide, knew the jungle's secrets, but resented Baxter's high-handed manner. Clara Wentworth, the researcher, had clashed with Baxter over academic credit. Hawthorne, the sponsor, stood to gain a fortune from the temple's treasures, and Slade, the rival explorer, had a history of undercutting competitors, his career teetering on the edge of obscurity. Miss Marple listened, her needles never faltering. "A curious group," she murmured, "each with a reason to wish Dr. Baxter ill. But strangling is personal, Henry. It requires closeness, intent. We must look for the one whose heart burned hottest." Sir Henry sighed. "You make it sound simple, Jane. But this jungle, it hides things, truths, motives, even killers." Miss Marple smiled faintly, her thoughts drifting to St. Mary Mead, where secrets hid in plain sight behind lace curtains and polite smiles. "Jungles or villages, Henry, people are much the same, and I've found that a little patience and a sharp eye can uncover what's hidden." She folded her knitting and rose, her small figure belying the keen mind that had already begun to unravel the threads of the strangled explorer's fate. Chapter 2. The Camp's Uneasy Pulse. The morning sun pierced the dense jungle canopy, casting a mosaic of light and shadow across the expedition's base camp. The air was thick with the scent of damp earth and decaying leaves, overlaid with the faint tang of coffee brewing over a small fire. Miss Jane Marple sat at a folding table under the main canvas awning, her knitting neatly folded beside a chipped mug. Her presence, so incongruous amidst the rugged tents and rough-hewn benches, drew curious glances from the camp's occupants, though none dared meet her mild, searching gaze for long. The death of Dr. Ernest Baxter, strangled in his tent the previous night, had cast a pall over the group, and the weight of suspicion hung heavier than the humidity. Sir Henry Clithering, his face etched with worry, joined Miss Marple as the camp stirred to life. He wore a lightweight khaki suit, already creased from the jungle's relentless damp, and his usual air of authority seemed tempered by the gravity of the situation. "I've spoken to the constable again," he said, lowering his voice as Diego Alvarez, the guide, passed by with a bundle of ropes. "He's out of his depth, Jane. He's taken basic statements, but they're as useful as a paper umbrella in this rain. Everyone claims they were in their tents, sleeping soundly, when Baxter was killed." Miss Marple's lips curved slightly, though her eyes remained fixed on the camp. "Sleeping soundly is a convenient claim, Henry," she said, her voice soft but laced with a quiet certainty. "In my experience, people are rarely as oblivious as they profess, especially in a place as close-knit as this camp. Someone heard something or saw something, even if they don't yet realize its significance." She sipped her coffee, noting its bitter edge, and let her gaze wander. The camp was a small, tightly packed affair, with 6 tents arranged in a rough semicircle around a central clearing. Dr. Baxter's tent, now cordoned off with a length of twine, stood at the far end, its canvas flap stirring in the faint breeze. Diego Alvarez was now crouched near the fire, sharpening a machete with deliberate strokes, his dark eyes flickering toward the others. Dr. Clara Wentworth, the expedition's botanist, sat on a stool a short distance away, her notebook open but untouched, her sharp features drawn in thought. Reginald Hawthorne, the sponsor, stood near the camp's makeshift kitchen, gesticulating animatedly as he spoke to Juan, the young porter, who nodded with a deference that seemed more fearful than respectful. Victor Slade, the rival explorer, leaned against a tent pole, polishing a pocket knife with a cloth, his movements leisurely but his eyes alert, scanning the group like a predator sizing up its prey. "They're a wary lot," Miss Marple remarked, her needles resuming their rhythmic click as she took up her knitting. "And not without reason. A murder in such a confined space. It's like a village, Henry, where secrets are never truly secret, only buried beneath polite pretenses." Sir Henry nodded, his brow furrowing. Baxter was the linchpin of this expedition. His discovery of that temple map set everything in motion. Whoever killed him must have had a powerful motive: jealousy, greed, or perhaps fear of what he'd found. Miss Marple's eyes twinkled faintly. "Motives are like threads, Henry. Tug at one, and the whole fabric begins to unravel. Let us see what threads we can find this morning." Breakfast was served under the awning, a simple affair of tinned beans, hard biscuits, and coffee, prepared by Juan under Hawthorne's watchful eye. The group gathered reluctantly, their movements stiff with the strain of shared suspicion. Miss Marple, ever the observer, took her place at the table, her small figure almost invisible amidst the larger personalities. She noted the seating arrangements. Diego sat at the table's edge, his posture tense as if ready to bolt. Clara positioned herself opposite, her eyes fixed on her plate. Hawthorne took the head of the table, his booming voice filling the silence with forced cheer. Slade, with his easy charm, sat beside Miss Marple, offering her a smile that she returned with polite reserve. As Juan poured coffee, Miss Marple engaged Diego in conversation, her tone as gentle as a village gossip's. "You must know this jungle well, Mr. Alvarez," she said, her needles pausing. "It's a marvel, really, how you navigate such a wild place. Dr. Baxter must have relied on you greatly." Diego's hand tightened around his mug, his knuckles whitening. "He relied on me when it suited him," he said, his voice low and edged with bitterness. "Dr. Baxter thought he knew better than anyone, better than me, better than the jungle itself. He pushed us hard, too hard sometimes, chasing that temple of his." Miss Marple nodded sympathetically, her mind drifting to a St. Mary Mead, blacksmith, who had resented the squire's high-handed orders. "It must be difficult," she said, "to work under someone who doesn't fully appreciate your knowledge." Diego's eyes met hers briefly, then dropped. It was his way, always looking for glory, never for the cost. She filed this away, noting the resentment in his tone, the way his fingers twitched as if itching to grip something tighter than a mug. She turned her attention to Clara Wentworth, who had barely touched her food. "And you, Doctor?" "Wentworth," Miss Marple said, her voice warm with interest. "Your work must be fascinating, studying plants in such an extraordinary place. What drew you to this expedition?" Clara's head snapped up, her eyes narrowing slightly, as if assessing whether Miss Marple's question held a trap. "The jungle is a treasure trove of undiscovered species," she said, her voice crisp. "I came to document its flora, but Baxter cared more for his ruins than my research. He saw my work as secondary, a footnote to his grand discovery." Miss Marple tilted her head, her expression one of innocent curiosity. "That must have been frustrating, my dear. In St. Mary Mead, we had a young artist once, quite talented, but overlooked by a pompous patron. It caused quite a stir." Clara's lips pressed into a thin line. "Frustrating, yes. He wanted to publish our findings under his name alone. I told him it wasn't right, but he wouldn't listen." The table fell silent, the weight of Clara's words settling over the group. Hawthorne cleared his throat, his jovial mask slipping for a moment. Now, Clara," he said, his voice hearty but strained. "Baxter was a visionary. We all had our roles to play. My role, of course, was to fund this venture, and I assure you, I had no quarrels with the man. His success was my success." Miss Marple's eyes lingered on Hawthorne, noting the sheen of sweat on his brow, despite the morning's relative coolness. His hands, adorned with a gold ring that seemed out of place in the jungle, fidgeted with his fork. She thought of a saint, Mary Mead merchant, always boasting of his wealth while his accounts told a different story. "A generous role, Mr. Hawthorne," she said mildly. "It must be a great responsibility, funding such an ambitious project." Hawthorne puffed out his chest, though his smile was tight. "It's an investment, Miss Marple. The temple's artifacts will fetch a fortune in London or New York. Baxter's work was worth every penny." Victor Slade, who had been listening with a faintly amused air, leaned forward, his voice smooth as polished stone. "And what a shame it would be if that work went to waste," he said, his eyes glinting. "Baxter was a competitor, but a fine one. I admired his drive, even if we didn't always see eye to eye." Miss Marple turned to him, her expression bland but her mind sharp. "Competition can be a powerful spur, Mr. Slade," she said. "In my village, we had 2 gardeners who vied for the best roses. It brought out their best, and sometimes their worst." Slade's laugh was low, almost intimate. "You're a shrewd one, Miss Marple. Yes, Baxter and I had our rivalries, but murder? That's a bit dramatic, even for a jungle." She smiled, her needles clicking steadily. "His charm was practiced, like that of a saint. Mary Mead's solicitor who could talk his way out of any scandal, or into one. She made a mental note of his ease, his quick deflection. A man so comfortable under scrutiny often had the most to hide. As breakfast ended, the group dispersed, their movements betraying their unease. Diego returned to his machete, Clara to her notebook, Hawthorne to his tent, and Slade to his lounging, though his eyes followed Miss Marple as she rose from the table. Sir Henry, who had remained silent during the meal, walked with her toward Baxter's tent, now guarded by the constable's twine. "They're all hiding something," Sir Henry muttered. "Diego's resentment, Clara's anger, Hawthorne's nerves, Slade's smoothness. It's a tangled mess." Miss Marple nodded, her eyes scanning the camp. "Tangled, yes, but not impenetrable. People reveal themselves in small ways, Henry. The way Diego grips his mug, the way Clara avoids looking at Baxter's tent, the way Hawthorne's hands betray his bravado, the way Slade watches everyone but pretends not to. We must simply keep watching." They paused outside Baxter's tent, where the air seemed heavier, as if the jungle itself mourned the man's passing. The constable, a young man with a nervous tic, stood nearby, clearly relieved to defer to Sir Henry. Miss Marple ducked under the twine, her small frame moving with surprising agility. The tent's interior was sparse: a cot, a folding desk, a trunk of supplies, and a lantern hanging from the center pole. The silk scarf, now removed as evidence, had left its mark in her mind. A delicate thing, out of place in this rugged setting, suggesting a killer with access to finery or a desire to mislead. She examined the cot, noting the rumpled bedding, the faint indentation where Baxter's head had lain. The ground beneath was hard-packed earth, offering no clear footprints, but she spotted a small tear in the tent's canvas near the entrance, barely noticeable unless one looked closely. "Interesting," she murmured, running her finger along the fabric. "This wasn't here when the tent was pitched, I'd wager." Sir Henry frowned. "A tear? Could the killer have entered that way?" "Perhaps," Miss Marple said, her tone thoughtful. "Or it could be a sign of struggle, or even a distraction. We mustn't jump to conclusions, Henry, but we mustn't ignore the small things either." She stepped outside, her eyes catching a glint of metal near the tent's base. Bending down, no small feat for a woman of her years, she retrieved a small brass button, engraved with a faint crest. She turned it over in her hand, her mind racing. "Now, who in this camp wears such a button?" She mused aloud, though she kept her thoughts to herself for now. As they returned to the awning, Miss Marple noticed Juan hovering near the kitchen, his eyes darting toward Baxter's tent. She approached him, her smile as disarming as a village grandmother's. "You've a difficult job here, Juan," she said kindly. "Keeping everyone fed in such a place, it's no small task." Juan nodded, his shoulders relaxing slightly. "It's hard, Señora. Dr. Baxter, he was demanding, always wanting more, always rushing." Miss Marple tilted her head, her voice soft. "And the night he died? Did you see anything unusual? Perhaps someone moving about the camp?" Juan hesitated, his fingers twisting the hem of his shirt. I shouldn't say. It's not my place." She leaned closer, her tone conspiratorial, as if sharing a village secret. "Anything you saw, however small, might help us find the truth. You wouldn't want an innocent person blamed, would you?" His eyes widened, and he glanced around before whispering, "I saw Señor Slade near Dr. Baxter's tent, late after the others were asleep. He had a bundle in his hands, but I didn't see what it was." Miss Marple patted his arm gently. "Thank you, Juan. You've been most helpful." As she rejoined Sir Henry, her mind was already weaving the threads together. Diego's resentment, Clara's anger, Hawthorne's nerves, Slade's nocturnal wanderings, the torn canvas, the brass button, the silk scarf. Each was a piece of the puzzle, but the picture remained elusive. She thought of a saint, Mary Mead's seamstress, who had unraveled a theft by noticing a single mismatched thread in a stolen shawl. "It's the small things, Henry," she said, her voice almost lost in the jungle's hum. "They always tell the story, if you listen." The camp settled into its daily rhythm, but the undercurrent of fear and suspicion pulsed stronger than ever. Miss Marple resumed her knitting, her needles clicking like a metronome, her eyes missing nothing. The jungle might hide its secrets, but she was determined to bring them to light, one careful stitch at a time. Chapter 3. The Scarf's Tale. The jungle's midday heat pressed down on the expedition camp like a smothering blanket, the air thick with the drone of cicadas and the distant chatter of monkeys. Miss Jane Marple sat in the shade of the main awning, her knitting needles moving with their usual quiet rhythm, though her mind was far from the simple scarf taking shape in her lap. The murder of Dr. Ernest Baxter, strangled with a silk scarf in his tent 2 nights prior, had stirred the camp into a cauldron of suspicion, and Miss Marple's sharp eyes were busy untangling the threads of motive and opportunity. The scarf itself, a delicate thing embroidered with vibrant parrots, had become a focal point of her thoughts, a clue as incongruous in this rugged setting as a lace doily in a blacksmith's forge. Sir Henry Clithering joined her, his face flushed from the heat and the strain of the investigation. He carried a battered notebook, its pages filled with the constable's scrawled notes, and his expression was one of frustrated determination. "The scarf, Jane," he said, settling onto a stool beside her. "It's the oddest piece of this puzzle. Silk, finely made, not the sort of thing you'd expect to find in a jungle camp. The constables kept it as evidence, but it's got me stumped. Who'd bring such a thing here?" Miss Marple's needles paused, her mild gaze lifting to meet his. "It's curious, isn't it, Henry? In St. Mary Mead, I once knew a lady who wore a silk shawl to church, quite out of place among the woolens and cottons. It wasn't just vanity. It was a statement, a way of standing apart. This scarf, I suspect, is more than a murder weapon. It's a message, though whether it points to the killer or someone they wish to implicate, I cannot yet say." She had seen the scarf briefly before. The constable secured it, a delicate weave, the parrot's feathers rendered in vivid greens and reds, the kind of item one might find in a London boutique or a traveler's carefully curated luggage. Its presence in Baxter's tent suggested either carelessness or cunning, and Miss Marple was inclined toward the latter. She recalled the camp's occupants, Diego Alvarez, the guide, Dr. Clara Wentworth, the botanist, Reginald Hawthorne, the sponsor, and Victor Slade, the rival explorer, and wondered which of them might have access to such a refined object. The camp was quieter now, the morning's tense breakfast giving way to the lethargy of the midday heat. Diego was mending a net near the supply tent, his movements precise, but his eyes darting toward the others. Clara sat under a nearby tree, her notebook open but her pencil idle, her face shadowed by more than the foliage. Hawthorne was in his tent, the faint clink of glass suggesting he was indulging in a midday drink. Slade, ever the restless one, prowled the camp's perimeter, his tall frame moving with a grace that belied the tension in his shoulders. Miss Marple rose, tucking her knitting into a small canvas bag, and approached the constable, a young man named Luis, who stood guard near Baxter's tent. His uniform was damp with sweat, and his nervous tick, a slight twitch of his left eye, seemed more pronounced under her scrutiny. "May I see the scarf again, Senor Luis?" she asked, her voice as gentle as a village vicar's wife. "I promise not to touch it, only to look." Luis hesitated, glancing toward Sir Henry, who nodded. He retrieved the scarf from a locked tin box, holding it up carefully by its edges. The silk shimmered in the dappled light, the parrot's embroidery almost lifelike. Miss Marple leaned closer, her eyes tracing the delicate stitching. "It's exquisite," she murmured. "Not the sort of thing one would discard lightly. Was it found exactly as it was around Dr. Baxter's neck?" Luis nodded, his voice halting. "Yes, Senora, tied tight in a sailor's knot, the kind used on boats. I untied it myself." Miss Marple's eyebrows lifted slightly. "A sailor's knot, you say? That's most interesting." She thought of a saint, Mary Mead fisherman, who had once shown her such a knot, strong and precise, not easily mastered by an amateur. "And was there anything else unusual in the tent? Any small detail that struck you?" Luis shifted uncomfortably. "Just the scarf, Senora, and, well, the tent flap was untied, though Dr. Baxter always tied it at night. I noticed because I checked the camp before bed." Miss Marple thanked him, her mind turning over this new detail. An untied flap suggested the killer had entered openly, perhaps known to Baxter, or had taken care to leave no trace of forced entry. She returned to the awning, where Sir Henry was waiting, his notebook now open on the table. "A sailor's knot," she said, resuming her seat. "That's a skill not everyone possesses. Diego, perhaps, with his knowledge of ropes? Or Mr. Slade, who's traveled the world and likely picked up such tricks." Sir Henry scribbled a note. "It's a start, Jane. But the scarf itself, who does it belong to? Clara's the only woman here, and it seems like something she might own." Miss Marple's lips pursed slightly. "We mustn't assume, Henry. In my village, a young man once wore a silk tie to impress a girl, quite out of character. The scarf could belong to anyone, or it could have been brought here to mislead us." Determined to test this thread, Miss Marple sought out Clara Wentworth, who was still under the tree, her notebook now closed. The botanist's angular face softened slightly at Miss Marple's approach, though her eyes remained guarded. "Doctor Wentworth," Miss Marple began, her tone as warm as a neighbor's. "I couldn't help but notice your elegant attire, even in this wild place. Do you ever wear scarves? Silk ones, perhaps, with a touch of color?" Clara's hand tightened on her notebook, her voice sharp. "Scarves? In this heat? No, Miss Marple, I'm practical. Cotton and canvas suit me here." "Why do you ask?" Miss Marple smiled, undeterred by the defensiveness. "Oh, just a passing thought. The scarf used in poor Dr. Baxter's murder. It's so striking with those lovely parrots. It made me wonder who might own such a thing." Clara's eyes flickered, a mix of surprise and unease. "I've never seen it before," she said quickly. "If it's silk, it's not mine. I don't care for such fripperies." Miss Marple nodded, her expression benign, but she noted the slight tremor in Clara's voice. She thought of a saint, Mary Mead schoolteacher, who had lied about a stolen brooch, her nerves betraying her, despite her words. Clara might be telling the truth, but her unease suggested she knew more than she let on. Next, Miss Marple approached Diego Alvarez, who was now coiling the net with deft hands. His dark eyes met hers warily as she greeted him. "Mr. Alvarez, you're so skilled with ropes and knots," she said, her voice admiring. "I imagine you know all sorts, perhaps even a sailor's knot?" Diego's hands stilled, his gaze narrowing. "I know many knots, Senora. The jungle demands it. Ropes for bridges, nets for supplies. But a sailor's knot? That's for boats, not jungles." Miss Marple tilted her head, her smile disarming. "Of course, but you've traveled widely, haven't you? Perhaps with other explorers, on rivers or coasts." Diego shrugged, his expression closing like a trap. "I stick to the jungle. Ask Slade. He's the one who sailed half the world." She thanked him, noting his deflection. His skill with ropes was undeniable, and his mention of Slade was a subtle shift of attention, much like a St. Mary Mead shopkeeper who pointed fingers to avoid scrutiny. As the afternoon waned, Miss Marple sought out Juan, the porter, who was washing dishes by a stream at the camp's edge. His nervous demeanor softened under her grandmotherly approach. "Juan," she said, crouching beside him with surprising ease. "You see so much in this camp, don't you? Things others might miss. That scarf? Had you ever seen it before, perhaps in someone's tent or luggage?" Juan's hands paused in the water, his eyes darting toward the camp. "No, Senora," he whispered. "But I saw Senor Slade with a bundle the night Dr. Baxter died. It was small, wrapped in cloth. I thought it was supplies, but now—" Miss Marple patted his shoulder gently. "You're very observant, Juan. Don't worry. We'll keep this between us." Returning to the awning, she shared Juan's revelation with Sir Henry, who frowned. "Slade again," he said. "That bundle could have been the scarf, or something else entirely. He's too clever to be caught with it, though." Miss Marple's needles resumed their click. "Cleverness can be a trap, Henry. In St. Mary Mead, a clever young man once hid stolen silver in plain sight, thinking no one would look twice. But someone always does." She glanced toward Slade, who was now whittling a stick, his movements casual, but his eyes never straying far from the group. The scarf, the knot, the untied flap, Juan's sighting of Slade. They were pieces of a pattern, not yet complete. Miss Marple thought of a saint, Mary Mead quilt, its patches mismatched until sewn together with care. "We must be patient, Henry," she said softly. "The scarf is telling us a story, but we've only heard the first lines." As the camp settled into the uneasy quiet of the afternoon, Miss Marple's mind wove through the clues, her knitting a steady counterpoint to the jungle's restless hum. The scarf's tale was far from over, and she was determined to follow its threads to the truth. Chapter 4. Motives in the Heat. The jungle's oppressive heat had reached its zenith, wrapping the expedition camp in a stifling embrace that seemed to tighten with each passing hour. The air shimmered above the packed earth, and even the birds had fallen silent, as if cowed by the weight of the day. Miss Jane Marple, undaunted by the climate, sat beneath the canvas awning, her knitting needles clicking with a calm persistence that belied the turmoil simmering among the camp's inhabitants. The murder of Dr. Ernest Baxter, strangled 2 nights ago with a silk scarf, had fractured the fragile harmony of the group, and Miss Marple's keen mind was now focused on the motives that might drive one to such a desperate act. Sir Henry Clithering, his khaki shirt clinging damply to his frame, paced nearby, his frustration palpable. "It's this blasted heat, Jane," he muttered, fanning himself with his notebook. "It's making everyone edgy, and I'm no closer to sorting out who killed Baxter. They all had reasons to dislike him. But strangling? That's a cold, deliberate choice." Miss Marple's eyes, sharp behind their mild facade, followed the movements of the camp's occupants. "Deliberate, yes," she said softly, her voice almost lost in the hum of insects. "And personal. Strangling requires closeness, Henry, a moment of intimacy, however grim. It's not the act of a stranger or a casual foe. We must look to those who felt deeply wronged or deeply threatened by Dr. Baxter." She had learned, through quiet observation and careful questions, that Baxter's discovery of a map to a lost temple had set the camp ablaze with ambition. The temple, rumored to hold artifacts of immense archaeological and monetary value, was the prize that had drawn this disparate group to the jungle's heart. Each member, Diego Alvarez, the guide, Dr. Clara Wentworth, the botanist, Reginald Hawthorne, the sponsor, and Victor Slade, the rival explorer, stood to gain or lose something significant from Baxter's success. Miss Marple, accustomed to the petty rivalries and hidden grudges of St. Mary Mead, knew that such stakes could turn even the most civilized heart to murder. As the camp stirred from its midday lethargy, Miss Marple decided to probe deeper. She approached Diego Alvarez first, finding him near the supply tent, where he was sorting through a crate of tinned goods. His wiry frame was tense, his dark eyes guarded as he glanced up at her approach. "Mr. Alvarez," she began, her tone as warm as a village neighbor's, "you've been so patient with all our questions. It must be trying, working in such a tense camp. Dr. Baxter, I understand, was a demanding leader. Did he ever overlook your expertise, perhaps?" Diego's hands paused, his fingers tightening around a tin of beans. "Overlook?" he said, his voice low and bitter. "He treated me like a pack mule, Senora. I know this jungle, its rivers, its paths, its dangers. My people have lived here for generations. But Baxter? He thought his maps and books made him wiser than me. He'd bark orders, never listen when I warned him about the terrain or the weather." Miss Marple nodded, her expression sympathetic. "That must have been galling," she said. "In St. Mary Mead, we had a gardener once, a fine man, who bristled when the squire ignored his advice about roses. It's hard to be dismissed when you know your worth." Diego's jaw tightened, and he looked away, his gaze lost in the jungle's green depths. "He wanted the temple for himself," he said. "For fame, for glory. He didn't care what it cost us or the jungle. My people, we respect the old places. Baxter would have torn them apart." Miss Marple noted the passion in his voice, the way his hands clenched as if gripping an imagined slight. She thanked him gently and moved on, her mind turning to a saint. Mary Mead farmer who had once sabotaged a rival's crops over a similar slight. Resentment, she knew, could fester into something far darker. Next, she sought out Dr. Clara Wentworth, who was cataloging plant specimens at a makeshift table near her tent. Her sharp features were drawn, her eyes red-rimmed, as if sleep had eluded her since the murder. Miss Marple settled onto a stool beside her, her knitting in hand, and offered a smile. "Your work is so fascinating, Doctor." "Wentworth," she said, "all these plants, so new to science. It must be frustrating when others don't see their value as you do." Clara's pencil stilled, her gaze meeting Miss Marple's with a flicker of suspicion. "Frustrating doesn't begin to cover it," she said, her voice tight. Baxter saw my research as an afterthought. He was obsessed with his temple, his artifacts. He planned to publish our findings, my findings, under his name alone. Years of my work reduced to a footnote in his glory. Miss Marple's needles clicked softly, her expression one of quiet concern. "That's most unfair," she said. "In my village, a young poetess once had her verses claimed by a pompous critic. It caused such a stir, and she was quite fierce in her response. Did you confront Dr. Baxter about this?" Clara's lips pressed into a thin line. "I did," she admitted. "The day before he died. We argued in his tent. He laughed it off, said the world cared more for temples than weeds. I told him I'd fight to keep my name on my work, but he just smirked." Miss Marple nodded, her mind noting the anger in Clara's eyes, the way her hands trembled as she spoke. She thought of a saint, Mary Mead, seamstress, who had once cut a rival's best dress in a fit of rage over stolen credit. Clara's anger was palpable, but was it enough to kill? Reginald Hawthorne was her next target, found lounging in his tent with a glass of whiskey, despite the early hour. His portly, frame-filled canvas chair, and his fine linen suit, though creased, spoke of wealth, or the appearance of it. He greeted Miss Marple with a forced joviality, offering her a seat and a glass, which she politely declined. "Mr. Hawthorne," she said, her voice warm but probing, "you've invested so much in this expedition. It must be a great responsibility, ensuring its success. Dr. Baxter's death must be a terrible blow." Hawthorne's smile faltered, his fingers tightening around his glass. "A blow, yes," he said, his voice booming but strained. "Baxter was the key to this venture, his map, his vision. It was all going to make us rich. Not just me, mind you, but the whole team. Museums, collectors, they'd pay a fortune for what's in that temple." Miss Marple tilted her head, her eyes keen. "And now, with him gone, what happens to your investment?" Hawthorne's eyes flickered, and he took a quick sip of whiskey. "We'll carry on, of course. The map's still here, and we've got Diego to guide us, but it's a setback, no doubt. Baxter was difficult, but he was brilliant." Miss Marple smiled faintly, noting the sweat beading on his brow, despite the shade. She recalled a saint, Mary Mead merchant, who had boasted of wealth while his debts mounted, his nerves betraying him in just such a way. "It must be a strain," she said, "pouring so much into a venture with such risks." Hawthorne's laugh was hollow. "Risk is part of the game, Miss Marple, but I assure you, I had no reason to harm Baxter. His success was mine." She thanked him and moved on, her thoughts lingering on his nervous gestures, the way his wealth seemed more performance than reality. Finally, she approached Victor Slade, who was sharpening his pocket knife near the camp's edge, his movements deliberate and his smile as polished as the blade. "Mr. Slade," she said, settling onto a nearby log, "you've seen so much of the world. This expedition must seem tame compared to your adventures. Did you find Dr. Baxter a worthy rival?" Slade's eyes glinted, his smile never wavering. "Worthy? Oh, Baxter was a giant in his field, Miss Marple. A bit full of himself, perhaps, but driven. We had our differences, sure. Two explorers chasing the same prize rarely get along, but I respected him." Miss Marple's needles clicked steadily, her gaze steady. "Rivalry can be so invigorating," she said. "In St. Mary Mead, two bakers competed for years over the best scones. It spurred them to greatness, but also to some rather underhanded tricks. Did you and Dr. Baxter ever compete in such ways?" Slade's laugh was smooth, but his eyes narrowed slightly. "Tricks? No, Nothing so petty. We were professionals. But I won't lie. His temple find would have put him back on top, left me in the dust. That's the game, though. You win some, you lose some. Miss Marple nodded, her mind noting the calculation behind his charm. The way he deflected with ease. She thought of a saint, Mary Mead Charmer, who had swindled half the village with his smiles, his lies as smooth as silk. Slade's career, she knew, was faltering, and Baxter's triumph would have been his ruin. As the afternoon faded into the golden haze of evening, Miss Marple returned to the awning, her mind a tapestry of motives. Diego's resentment of Baxter's arrogance, Clara's fury over stolen credit, Hawthorne's financial stakes, Slade's threatened legacy. Each had a reason to wish Baxter gone, but only one had acted. She thought of a saint, Mary Mead widow, who had poisoned a rival over a shared lover, her motive hidden behind a mask of grief. "Motives are the heart of it, Henry," she said to Sir Henry, who had joined her once more. "But we must find the one whose heart burned hottest." Sir Henry sighed, his notebook filled with jotted clues. "It's a devil of a puzzle, Jane. They all had reason, but none seemed the type to strangle a man in cold blood." Miss Marple's needles clicked, her smile serene. "People surprise us, Henry. Even the mildest soul can act when pushed too far. We must keep watching and listening, for the truth lies in what they don't say as much as what they do." The camp settled into an uneasy dusk, the jungle's chorus rising around them. Miss Marple's thoughts wove through the motives she had uncovered, each a thread in the growing pattern of Baxter's murder. The heat might weigh heavy, but her resolve was unshaken, and she knew the truth was closer than it seemed. Chapter 5. The Night's Shadows. The jungle exhaled a humid breath as dusk settled over the expedition camp, the sky bruising into shades of indigo and amber. The flickering glow of lanterns cast long shadows across the clearing, and the air thrummed with the restless chorus of nocturnal creatures. Miss Jane Marple, seated on a low stool beneath the canvas awning, worked her knitting needles with their familiar, soothing rhythm, though her thoughts were far from tranquil. The murder of Dr. Ernest Baxter, strangled in his tent 3 nights prior with a silk scarf, had woven a web of suspicion around the camp's inhabitants, and Miss Marple was determined to trace its strands back to the killer. Tonight, she resolved to recreate the fatal night in her mind, piecing together the shadows that had cloaked the crime. Sir Henry Clithering joined her, his face etched with fatigue, his khaki shirt rumpled from another day of fruitless inquiries. He carried a tin mug of tea, its steam curling into the cooling air, and his eyes held a mix of frustration and hope as he settled beside her. "We're no closer, Jane," he said, his voice low to avoid the ears of the camp. "The constable's statements are useless. Everyone swears they were asleep, and we've no witnesses beyond Juan's vague sighting of Slade. It's as if the jungle itself swallowed the truth." Miss Marple's needles paused, her mild gaze lifting to survey the camp. "The jungle hides much, Henry, but people hide more," she said softly. "In St. Mary Mead, I once solved a theft by noticing who wasn't where they claimed to be. A camp this small at night is never truly silent. We must listen to its whispers." The camp had settled into its evening routine, though the undercurrent of tension was palpable. Diego Alvarez sat by the fire, mending a leather strap, his movements deliberate, but his eyes darting toward the darkened tents. Dr. Clara Wentworth was in her tent, the faint glow of a lantern outlining her silhouette as she pored over her notes. Reginald Hawthorne, his voice carrying from the cook tent, was regaling Juan with tales of his London exploits, though the porter's responses were curt. Victor Slade, ever restless, had wandered to the camp's edge, claiming to study the stars, his tall figure barely visible in the gathering gloom. Miss Marple's mind turned to the night of the murder. Baxter had dined with the group, a tense affair marked by stilted conversation, according to Juan. He had retired early, complaining of a headache, his tent flap tied shut, as was his habit. By midnight, the camp was quiet, save for the jungle's ceaseless hum. The killer, she reasoned, had moved with purpose, slipping into Baxter's tent undetected, strangling him with the silk scarf, and vanishing before dawn. The untied flap, the sailor's knot, the scarf itself, all pointed to a calculated act, not a spur-of-the-moment crime. She rose, her small frame moving with quiet determination, and approached Clara Wentworth's tent. The botanist looked up as Miss Marple tapped lightly on the canvas, her sharp features softening slightly at the sight of the elderly woman. "Doctor?" "Wentworth," Miss Marple said, her voice warm but probing. "I've been thinking about the night poor Dr. Baxter died. It must have been so quiet here, with everyone abed. Did you hear anything unusual? Perhaps a rustle or a step outside your tent?" Clara's eyes narrowed, her fingers tightening on her pencil. "I was asleep," she said, her tone clipped. "This jungle is noisy. Monkeys, birds, insects. You stop noticing after a while. I heard nothing out of the ordinary." Miss Marple nodded, her smile disarming. "Of course, my dear. But in St. Mary Mead, I once caught a poacher because a neighbor heard a twig snap at midnight. The smallest sound can linger in the memory, even if we don't realize it at the time." Clara hesitated, her gaze flickering toward Baxter's tent. "I suppose I did hear something," she admitted reluctantly. "A soft thud, like a bag being set down, but I thought it was Diego checking the supplies. He's often up late." Miss Marple thanked her, filing away the detail. A thud could mean many things: a dropped bundle, a careless step, or something more sinister. She thought of a saint, Mary Mead Maid, who had overheard a burglar's misstep, a sound that led to his capture. Clara's admission, however grudging, was a thread worth following. Next, she sought out Juan, finding him stacking firewood near the cook tent. His nervous demeanor softened under her gentle approach, as it had before. "Juan," she said, her voice conspiratorial, "you've such sharp eyes and ears. That night Dr. Baxter died, you mentioned seeing Mr. Slade with a bundle. Did you hear anything else, perhaps voices or footsteps near his tent?" Juan's hands stilled, his eyes darting toward the jungle. "I shouldn't speak, Senora," he whispered. "But I heard a low voice, not loud, near Dr. Baxter's tent. It was quick, like someone muttering. I couldn't make out words, and I didn't see who it was." Miss Marple patted his arm, her smile reassuring. "You've done well to remember, Juan. Don't worry. We'll keep this quiet." She returned to the awning, her mind weaving together Clara's thud and Juan's muttered voice. The camp's layout, she noted, placed Baxter's tent at the edge, closest to Slade's, with Diego's and Clara's nearby. Hawthorne's tent, larger and set apart, was farther from the scene. The killer had likely approached from the jungle's edge, where shadows offered cover, and slipped away unnoticed. But the muttered voice suggested a moment of hesitation or confrontation. Perhaps Baxter had been awake, however briefly. Determined to explore further, Miss Marple approached Baxter's tent, now unguarded as the constable had retired for the evening. She ducked under the twine, her lantern casting a soft glow across the sparse interior. The cot, desk, and trunk remained as she had seen them, but she knelt to examine the floor more closely. Near the tent's entrance, she spotted a faint smudge of mud, barely discernible on the hard earth. It was shaped like the heel of a boot, too small to be Baxter's, whose boots she had seen stacked neatly in the corner. She straightened, her mind racing. The smudge suggested the killer had entered from outside, perhaps tracking mud from the jungle's edge. She recalled a saint, Mary Mead Gardner, who had been caught by a muddy footprint left in a flower bed, a careless clue that unraveled his alibi. Stepping outside, she followed the faint path from the tent to the jungle's edge, her lantern revealing a cluster of crushed ferns, as if someone had stood there, watching or waiting. Returning to the awning, she shared her findings with Sir Henry, who rubbed his chin thoughtfully. "A boot print, a muttered voice, a thud," he said. "It's something, Jane, but it's still vague. And Slade, Juan's sighting keeps pointing to him, but he's slippery as an eel." Miss Marple's needles resumed their click, her expression serene. "Slippery, yes, but even eels leave ripples, Henry. Mr. Slade's nocturnal habits are curious. He claims to study the stars, but stars don't require bundles or muttered words." Sir Henry frowned. "You think he's our man?" "Not yet," she said, her voice calm but firm. "We mustn't leap, Henry. In St. Mary Mead, I once suspected a vicar of theft because he was always about at odd hours. It turned out he was visiting the sick. We need more before we accuse." She glanced toward Slade, who had returned to the camp, now whittling a stick by the firelight. His eyes met hers briefly, his smile as polished as ever, but she sensed a wariness beneath it. She thought of a saint, Mary Mead Charmer, who had used his charm to mask a theft, his confidence undone by a single overlooked detail. As the camp settled into the night, Miss Marple's thoughts turned to the boot print, the voice, the thud, and the scarf's sailor's knot. Each was a shadow in the night's tapestry, hinting at the killer's movements, but not yet revealing their face. She recalled a saint, Mary Mead Mystery, where a whispered argument, overheard by a milkman, had cracked the case wide open. "The night hides much," she murmured to Sir Henry, "but it also speaks if we know how to listen." The lanterns flickered, casting dancing shadows across the camp, and Miss Marple's knitting continued, a steady rhythm against the jungle's restless pulse. The truth, she knew, was lurking in those shadows, waiting for her to coax it into the light. Chapter 6. The Guide's Burden. The jungle awoke with the dawn's first light, a chorus of bird calls and rustling leaves piercing the heavy stillness that had cloaked the expedition camp through the night. Miss Jane Marple, ever an early riser, sat beneath the canvas awning, her knitting needles moving with their customary precision, though her thoughts were tangled in the web of Dr. Ernest Baxter's murder. The silk scarf, the sailor's knot, the muddy boot print, the muttered voice, and the thud in the night. All were threads in a pattern she was determined to unravel. Today, her focus turned to Diego Alvarez, the local guide, whose quiet demeanor and deft hands hinted at depths not yet plumbed. Sir Henry Clithering joined her as the camp stirred, his face haggard from sleeplessness, his notebook now a tattered companion to his growing frustration. "Another day, Jane," he said, settling beside her with a mug of bitter coffee. "We've got clues, but they're like jungle vines, tangled and leading nowhere fast. Diego's been on my mind. He's steady, but there's something in his eyes, a resentment that runs deep. Miss Marple's needles paused, her mild gaze drifting toward Diego, who was checking a rope bridge slung across a narrow stream at the camp's edge. His movements were sure, his hands expert as they tested the knots, but his shoulders were hunched, as if carrying a weight heavier than the ropes. "Resentment is a powerful force, Henry," she said softly. "In St. Mary Mead, I knew a blacksmith who nursed a grudge against a landowner for years. It was a small slight, but it grew until it consumed him. We must learn what burden Diego carries." The camp was slowly coming to life. Dr. Clara Wentworth emerged from her tent, her face pale and drawn, her notebook clutched like a shield. Reginald Hawthorne, his linen suit already creased, barked orders at Juan, the porter, who scurried to prepare breakfast. Victor Slade, as ever, lounged near his tent, his sharp eyes scanning the group while he polished his pocket knife with a casual air that Miss Marple found calculated. She noted the dynamics, Clara's isolation, Hawthorne's bluster, Slade's watchfulness, and filed them away, her mind returning to Diego. She approached him at the bridge, her small figure dwarfed by the towering trees, her smile as disarming as a village grandmother's. "Mr. Alvarez," she began, her voice warm, "this bridge is a marvel. Your skill with ropes is truly remarkable. It must take years to master such craft." Diego glanced up, his dark eyes wary but softened by her tone. "It's nothing, Señora," he said, his hands stilling on the rope. "My father taught me, and his father before him. The jungle demands strong knots, or you don't survive." Miss Marple nodded, settling onto a nearby rock, her knitting in her lap. "A fine tradition," she said. "Dr. Baxter must have valued your expertise, leading him through such treacherous terrain, though I've heard he could be dismissive at times." Diego's jaw tightened, his fingers tightening around the rope. "Dismissive?" he said, his voice low and edged with bitterness. "He treated me like a servant, not a guide. I told him the paths to the temple were dangerous, that the rains would come early this year. He laughed, said his maps were better than my knowledge. He'd have led us into a swamp if I hadn't corrected him." Miss Marple's eyes twinkled with sympathy. "That must have been trying," she said. "In St. Mary Mead, we had a groundskeeper who bristled when the vicar ignored his advice about planting. It's hard to be overlooked when you know the truth of things." Diego's gaze dropped, his hands resuming their work, though slower now. "He didn't just overlook me," he said. "He insulted my people, called our stories about the temple superstition. That temple, it's sacred to us, Señora. My grandfather told tales of its guardians, spirits that protect it. Baxter wanted to rip it open, take its treasures for his museums." Miss Marple leaned forward, her voice gentle but probing. "And that angered you, didn't it, to see your heritage dismissed?" Diego's hands stilled again, his eyes flashing with a mix of pride and pain. "Angered me, yes, but I didn't kill him. I wanted him to fail, to see he wasn't above the jungle, but I wouldn't do that." She nodded, noting the passion in his voice, the way his hands gripped the rope as if anchoring himself against the memory. She thought of a saint, Mary Mead Farmer, who had sabotaged a rival's fence over a similar slight, his anger stopping short of violence but teetering on the edge. "You've a strong spirit, Mr. Alvarez," she said, "and a skilled hand with knots, that sailor's knot on the scarf. Could you tie such a thing?" Diego's eyes narrowed, but he answered readily. "A sailor's knot? I know it, Señora. We use it sometimes for securing loads on rivers, but anyone who's traveled could know it. Slade, for instance. He's been on ships, hasn't he?" Miss Marple smiled, her mind noting his quick deflection, much like a St. Mary Mead shopkeeper who pointed fingers to avoid suspicion. "Indeed," she said. "You're very observant. Did you see anything that night? Perhaps someone near Dr. Baxter's tent?" Diego hesitated, his gaze flickering toward Slade's tent. "I was in my tent," he said, "but I heard something, a rustle like someone moving through the ferns. I thought it was an animal, but now I'm not sure." She thanked him, her mind weaving this new thread into the pattern. A rustle in the ferns, a sailor's knot, a grudge against Baxter's arrogance. Diego's burden was heavy, but was it murderous? She returned to the awning where Sir Henry was waiting, his notebook open. "Diego's got reason to hate Baxter," Sir Henry said, his voice low. "That business about the temple being sacred, it's personal for him, and his skill with knots doesn't help his case." Miss Marple's needles resumed their click, her expression serene. "Personal, yes, but we must be careful, Henry. In St. Mary Mead, I once suspected a choir boy of theft because he had motive and opportunity. It turned out he was protecting his sister. Diego's anger is real, but his heart may not be that of a killer." She glanced toward the bridge, where Diego was now testing the ropes with a practiced tug. His skill was evident, his hands moving with the confidence of long experience. The sailor's knot on the scarf had been expertly tied, a detail that pointed to someone with such expertise, or someone clever enough to mimic it. She thought of a St. Mary Mead sailor who had taught her the knot's intricacies, explaining its strength and precision. Diego's mention of Slade was intriguing, a subtle shift of blame that suggested he knew more than he let on. Determined to test another angle, Miss Marple approached Juan, who was sweeping the cook tent, his nervous demeanor unchanged. "Juan," she said, her voice soft as a breeze, "you've been so helpful. That night Dr. Baxter died, you mentioned Mr. Slade with a bundle. Did you ever see Mr. Alvarez near the tent, perhaps checking the camp as he often does?" Juan's broom stilled, his eyes darting toward Diego. "No, Señora," he whispered. "Señor Alvarez was in his tent when I checked the fires. But I saw him earlier that day, arguing with Dr. Baxter by the stream. He looked angry, angrier than I've seen him." Miss Marple nodded, patting his arm. "You're a good lad, Juan. Keep your eyes open, but don't fret." Returning to Sir Henry, she shared Juan's observation. "An argument by the stream," Sir Henry said, scribbling in his notebook. "That's new. Diego's looking more likely, Jane. Motive, skill with knots, and now a public row." Miss Marple's needles clicked steadily, her mind sifting through the clues. "Perhaps," she said, "but we mustn't rush. Diego's burden is heavy, pride, heritage, resentment, but murder requires a colder heart. We need to know more about that argument and what rustle he heard in the ferns." As the morning sun climbed, bathing the camp in a golden haze, Miss Marple watched Diego return to his tasks, his movements steady, but his eyes haunted. She thought of a saint, Mary Mead Gardner, who had carried a grudge for years, his anger simmering but never boiling over. Diego's burden was clear, but whether it had driven him to strangle Baxter remained a question. The jungle's shadows held their secrets, but Miss Marple was determined to coax them into the light, one careful question at a time. Chapter 7. The Sponsor's Gambit, The jungle's midday sun blazed overhead, its relentless heat seeping through the canvas awning where Miss Jane Marple sat, her knitting needles clicking with unhurried precision. The expedition camp, nestled in a clearing of tangled vines and towering trees, pulsed with an uneasy rhythm. The murder of Dr. Ernest Baxter, 4 nights prior, casting a long shadow over its inhabitants. The silk scarf, the sailor's knot, the muddy boot print, the muttered voice, and Diego's rustle in the ferns had woven a complex tapestry of clues. And Miss Marple's sharp mind was now turning to Reginald Hawthorne, the expedition's wealthy sponsor, whose booming voice and polished exterior hid a nervousness she found increasingly curious. Sir Henry Clithering joined her, his face etched with the strain of their fruitless investigation, his notebook now a dog-eared testament to their growing list of questions. He mopped his brow with a handkerchief, the humidity rendering his khaki suit limp. "Jane," he said, his voice low, "I've been thinking about Hawthorne. He's all bluster and cigars, but there's something off. He's poured a fortune into this expedition, and Baxter's death puts it all at risk. A man like that doesn't take losses lightly." Miss Marple's needles paused, her mild gaze drifting toward Hawthorne's tent, where the faint clink of glass suggested another midday drink. "Money, Henry, is a motive as old as time," she said softly. "In St. Mary Mead, I knew a merchant who risked his family's savings on a failing venture. His desperation led to unwise choices. We must see if Mr. Hawthorne's wealth is as secure as he claims, and what he stood to lose or gain by Dr. Baxter's death." The camp was subdued, the heat sapping energy from all but the most restless. Diego Alvarez was repairing a torn net near the supply tent, his hands steady but his eyes guarded. Dr. Clara Wentworth sat under a tree, her notebook open but untouched, her sharp features drawn with fatigue. Victor Slade prowled the camp's edge, his pocket-knife glinting as he whittled a stick, his smile as calculated as ever. Hawthorne, however, was the focus of Miss Marple's attention. His tent, larger and better furnished than the others, stood apart, a symbol of his status, or perhaps his need to assert it. She rose, tucking her knitting into her canvas bag, and approached Hawthorne's tent, her small figure moving with a quiet grace that belied her years. The flap was open, and she found him sprawled in a canvas chair, a glass of whiskey in one hand, a cigar smoldering in an ashtray. His linen suit, though creased, was of fine quality, and a gold watch gleamed on his wrist, its ostentation at odds with the jungle's austerity. He looked up as she entered, his jovial mask slipping into a wary smile. "Miss Marple," he boomed, gesturing to a stool. "A pleasure to see you. Care for a drink? It's beastly hot, but a splash of whiskey does wonders." Miss Marple declined with a polite smile, settling onto the stool with her hands folded neatly in her lap. "You're very kind, Mr. Hawthorne," she said, her voice warm but probing. "This expedition must be a grand adventure for you, funding such a bold venture. Dr. Baxter's discovery of the temple map, it must have promised a splendid return on your investment." Hawthorne's eyes flickered, his fingers tightening around his glass. "Splendid, yes," he said, his tone hearty but strained. "Baxter was a genius, you know. That temple of his, artifacts worth a king's ransom, museums, private collectors, they'd pay through the nose. My money was well spent, I assure you." Miss Marple tilted her head, her expression one of innocent curiosity. "And now, with him gone? It must be a terrible blow to your plans." Hawthorne took a quick sip of whiskey, his smile faltering. "A blow, certainly," he said. "But we'll press on. The map's still here, and Diego knows the jungle. We'll find that temple yet, and Baxter's name will live on, along with mine, of course." She nodded, noting the sweat beading on his brow, despite the shade of the tent. His hands, adorned with that ostentatious watch, fidgeted with the glass, betraying a nervousness that his booming voice could not mask. She thought of a saint, Mary Mead Banker, who had boasted of wealth while his accounts teetered on ruin, his nerves giving him away in just such a manner. "It's a great responsibility," she said, "funding such a venture. In my village, we had a gentleman who invested heavily in a new mill. When it faltered, he grew quite anxious. You must feel a similar weight with so much at stake." Hawthorne's laugh was forced, his eyes darting toward the tent flap. "Anxious? Not at all, Miss Marple. I've backed plenty of ventures, mines, railways, expeditions. This is just another game, and I play to win." Miss Marple's smile remained serene, but her mind was sharp. "Of course," she said, "though I imagine Dr. Baxter's determination could have caused friction. A man so driven might make demands, perhaps on your resources." Hawthorne's fingers tightened around his glass, and he stubbed out his cigar with gong fu system. Cigar with more force than necessary. Demands? Baxter was a hard driver, but he knew his business. We argued now and then, budgets, schedules, but it was all professional. Miss Marple nodded, her eyes lingering on his watch, its gold glinting in the dim light. "Naturally," she said, "you must have had great faith in him to fund such an ambitious project." She thanked him and rose, her mind cataloging his nervous gestures, the quick gulps of whiskey, the forced bravado. As she stepped out into the humid air, she spotted Juan, the porter, carrying a stack of firewood. His nervous demeanor softened at her approach, and she seized the opportunity for a quiet word. "Juan," she said, her voice gentle, "you work so hard for everyone here. Did you ever overhear Mr. Hawthorne and Dr. Baxter discussing their plans, perhaps an argument about money?" Juan hesitated, glancing toward Hawthorne's tent. "Si, señora," he whispered. "A few days before it happened, they argued by the stream. Señor Hawthorne was angry, saying the expedition was costing too much. Dr. Baxter shouted back, said he needed more supplies, more time." Miss Marple patted his arm, her smile reassuring. "You're a great help, Juan. Don't worry, this stays between us." She returned to the awning where Sir Henry awaited, his notebook open and his expression grim. "Any luck with Hawthorne?" he asked. Miss Marple settled onto her stool, her knitting resuming its steady rhythm. "He's a man under pressure, Henry," she said. "His wealth may not be as solid as he claims, and Baxter's demands could have pushed him to the edge." Juan overheard a heated argument about money, a dangerous motive. Sir Henry scribbled a note, his brow furrowed. "Money and murder go hand in hand too often," he said. "But Hawthorne's no fool. Would he risk it all with a scarf and a knot?" Miss Marple's needles clicked softly, her mind weaving through the clues. Hawthorne's nervous bluster, his costly watch, the argument over funds, the silk scarf's misplaced elegance. She thought of a saint, Mary Mead merchant who had forged documents to hide his debts, his desperation masked by a veneer of prosperity. "Desperation makes fools of clever men, Henry," she said, "but we must be certain. The scarf, the knot, the boot print, they all point somewhere, and we must follow." The camp buzzed with the jungle's restless energy, and Miss Marple's thoughts turned to the growing pattern of motives, Diego's resentment, Clara's anger, Hawthorne's financial strain, Slade's rivalry. Each was a piece of the puzzle, but the picture remained elusive. She recalled a saint, Mary Mead, widow, whose desperation for money had led to betrayal, her polished facade crumbling under scrutiny. Hawthorne's gambit, she sensed, was a fragile one, and she was determined to uncover its truth. Chapter 8. The Rival's Charm. The jungle's evening air settled over the expedition camp like a heavy curtain, the fading light casting long shadows that danced with the flicker of lanterns. The hum of insects and the distant calls of night creatures filled the silence, but the camp itself was steeped in a tension that no jungle chorus could mask. Miss Jane Marple sat by the central fire, her knitting needles moving with their steady, unhurried rhythm, her mild eyes scanning the group with a sharpness that belied her grandmotherly demeanor. The murder of Dr. Ernest Baxter, strangled 5 nights ago with a silk scarf, had woven a complex web of suspicion, and Miss Marple's thoughts now turned to Victor Slade, the rival explorer whose polished charm and restless energy marked him as a figure of intrigue. Sir Henry Clithering joined her, his face drawn with the weight of their ongoing investigation, his notebook now a tattered companion filled with half-formed theories. He sat heavily on a stool beside her, his voice low to avoid the ears of the camp. "Jane," he said, "Slade's been nagging at me. That man's too smooth, too quick with his smiles." Juan saw him with a bundle near Baxter's tent, and Diego pointed to his sailing experience. "He's got the means and the motive. Baxter's success would have buried his career." Miss Marple's needles paused, her gaze drifting toward Slade, who lounged against a tent pole, his tall frame silhouetted against the firelight. He was whittling a stick, his pocket knife moving with a practiced ease, his smile flashing as he caught her eye. "Charm, Henry, is a dangerous thing," she said softly. "In St. Mary Mead, I knew a young man who could talk his way out of any trouble, but his smiles hid a calculating heart. Mr. Slade's charm is a mask, and we must see what lies beneath." The camp was settling into its evening rhythm, though the air crackled with unease. Diego Alvarez was coiling ropes near the supply tent, his dark eyes wary as he worked. Dr. Clara Wentworth sat at the edge of the firelight, her notebook closed, her sharp features etched with fatigue. Reginald Hawthorne, his voice booming from his tent, was regaling Juan with another tale of London grandeur, though the porter's responses were muted. Slade, however, seemed apart from the group, his movements deliberate, his gaze never lingering too long on any one person. Miss Marple rose, tucking her knitting into her canvas bag, and approached Slade, her small figure moving with a quiet determination. He looked up as she neared, his smile broadening, though his eyes held a flicker of caution. "Miss Marple," he said, his voice smooth as polished stone, "you're a brave soul, out here in the jungle. Care to join me for a chat? The stars are quite a sight tonight." She settled onto a nearby log, her smile polite but probing. "You're kind to offer, Mr. Slade," she said, "but I'm more interested in earthly matters. You and Dr. Baxter were rivals, I understand. It must have been challenging, competing with such a driven man." Slade's laugh was low, almost intimate, as he set his whittling aside. "Rivals, yes, but it was a friendly sort of thing," he said, his eyes glinting in the firelight. "Baxter was a titan in the field, relentless, brilliant. I admired him, even if we butted heads. His temple find was a coup, no question. It would have put him back on top." Miss Marple tilted her head, her expression one of innocent curiosity. "And you, Mr. Slade? In St. Mary Mead, we had two bakers who vied for the best bread. Their rivalry spurred them to greatness, but it also led to mischief. Did you and Dr. Baxter ever engage in such games?" Slade's smile tightened, though his tone remained light. "Mischief? I'm too old for that, Miss Marple. We competed, sure, expeditions, papers, lectures, but I play fair. Baxter's death is a tragedy, not a victory for me." She nodded, her needles resuming their click as she retrieved her knitting from her bag. "Of course," she said, "though I've heard you're fond of wandering at night, studying the stars. A curious habit in a camp so tense. Were you out the night, Doctor? Baxter died?" Slade's fingers stilled on his knife, his eyes narrowing slightly. "You're a sharp one," he said, his smile returning but less certain. "Yes, I was out. The stars clear my head, help me think. This jungle, it's suffocating sometimes. But I didn't go near Baxter's tent, if that's what you're wondering." Miss Marple's smile remained serene, but her mind noted the quick deflection, the way his charm faltered under scrutiny. She thought of a saint, Mary Mead's solicitor, who had used his silver tongue to mask a theft, his confidence undone by a single careless lie. "I'm sure you didn't," she said, "though Juan mentioned seeing you with a bundle that night. Supplies, perhaps?" Slade's laugh was sharp, his eyes flicking toward the fire. "Juan sees shadows and calls them ghosts," he said. "I carry all sorts of things, maps, tools, nothing sinister, I assure you." She thanked him, her mind cataloging his responses, the practiced charm, the vague answers, the subtle tension in his posture. As she returned to the awning, Sir Henry was waiting, his notebook open. "Well?" he asked, his voice eager. "Mr. Slade is a man who knows how to steer a conversation," she said, settling onto her stool. "He admits to being out that night, but his reasons are vague. That bundle Juan saw. It could be nothing, or it could be everything. We need more." Determined to probe further, Miss Marple sought out Clara Wentworth, who was now sipping tea by the fire, her eyes distant. "Doctor Wentworth," Miss Marple began, her tone warm. "You and Mr. Slade must have crossed paths often, both being scholars of sorts. Did he ever speak of Dr. Baxter, perhaps in a moment of candor?" Clara's lips tightened, her fingers gripping her mug. "Slade's no scholar," she said, her voice sharp. "He's an opportunist. A few years ago, he tried to steal Baxter's research during a joint expedition in Peru. Notes, maps. He'd have claimed it all if Baxter hadn't caught him. They've been at odds ever since." Miss Marple's eyebrows lifted slightly, her mind noting the depth of the rivalry. "That's most enlightening," she said. "In St. Mary Mead, a young artist once tried to pass off another's work as his own. It caused quite a scandal. Did Mr. Slade resent Dr. Baxter's success with the temple map?" Clara nodded, her eyes flashing. "Resent? He was furious. Slade's career has been slipping. Fewer expeditions, fewer headlines. Baxter's find would have finished him." Miss Marple thanked her, her thoughts racing. Slade's rivalry was deeper than she had suspected, a motive rooted in professional survival. She recalled a saint, Mary Mead grocer, who had sabotaged a rival's shop to save his own, his desperation masked by a friendly facade. Slade's charm, she sensed, was a similar mask, hiding a heart that burned with ambition. Returning to Sir Henry, she shared Clara's revelation. "Slade's got a history of underhanded dealings," Sir Henry said, scribbling furiously. "That bundle, his nighttime wanderings, this old feud, it's piling up against him." Miss Marple's needles clicked steadily, her expression calm but her mind sharp. "It is, Henry, but we must be cautious. Slade's clever, and clever men don't leave obvious trails. The scarf, the knot, the boot print, they may point to him, or they may be a frame to divert us." As the camp settled into the night, the fire casting flickering shadows across the tents, Miss Marple watched Slade, who had resumed his whittling, his smile as polished as ever. The jungle's darkness seemed to mirror the shadows in his heart, and she knew the truth was close, hidden behind his charm like a secret behind a saint. Mary Mead smiled. "Charm can blind, Henry," she murmured, "but it cannot hide forever." Chapter 8. The Rival's Charm. The jungle's evening air settled over the expedition camp like a heavy curtain, the fading light casting long shadows that danced with the flicker of lanterns. The hum of insects and the distant calls of night creatures filled the silence, but the camp itself was steeped in a tension that no jungle chorus could mask. Miss Jane Marple sat by the central fire, her knitting needles moving with their steady, unhurried rhythm, her mild eyes scanning the group with a sharpness that belied her grandmotherly demeanor. The murder of Dr. Ernest Baxter, strangled 5 nights ago with a silk scarf, had woven a complex web of suspicion, and Miss Marple's thoughts now turned to Victor Slade, the rival explorer whose polished charm and restless energy marked him as a figure of intrigue. Sir Henry Clithering joined her, his face drawn with the weight of their ongoing investigation, his notebook now a tattered companion filled with half-formed theories. He sat heavily on a stool beside her, his voice low to avoid the ears of the camp. "Jane," he said, "Slade's been nagging at me. That man's too smooth, too quick with his smiles." Juan saw him with a bundle near Baxter's tent, and Diego pointed to his sailing experience. "He's got the means and the motive. Baxter's success would have buried his career." Miss Marple's needles paused, her gaze drifting toward Slade, who lounged against a tent pole, his tall frame silhouetted against the firelight. He was whittling a stick, his pocket knife moving with a practiced ease, his smile flashing as he caught her eye. "Charm, Henry, is a dangerous thing," she said softly. "In St. Mary Mead, I knew a young man who could talk his way out of any trouble, but his smiles hid a calculating heart. Mr. Slade's charm is a mask, and we must see what lies beneath." The camp was settling into its evening rhythm, though the air crackled with unease. Diego Alvarez was coiling ropes near the supply tent, his dark eyes wary as he worked. Dr. Clara Wentworth sat at the edge of the firelight, her notebook closed, her sharp features etched with fatigue. Reginald Hawthorne, his voice booming from his tent, was regaling Juan with another tale of London grandeur, though the porter's responses were muted. Slade, however, seemed apart from the group, his movements deliberate, his gaze never lingering too long on any one person. Miss Marple rose, tucking her knitting into her canvas bag, and approached Slade, her small figure moving with a quiet determination. He looked up as she neared, his smile broadening, though his eyes held a flicker of caution. "Miss Marple," he said, his voice smooth as polished stone, "you're a brave soul out here in the jungle. Care to join me for a chat? The stars are quite a sight tonight." She settled onto a nearby log, her smile polite but probing. "You're kind to offer, Mr. Slade," she said, "but I'm more interested in earthly matters. You and Dr. Baxter were rivals, I understand. It must have been challenging, competing with such a driven man." Slade's laugh was low, almost intimate, as he set his whittling aside. "Rivals, yes, but it was a friendly sort of thing," he said, his eyes glinting in the firelight. "Baxter was a titan in the field, relentless, brilliant. I admired him, even if we butted heads. His temple find was a coup, no question. It would have put him back on top." Miss Marple tilted her head, her expression one of innocent curiosity. "And you, Mr. Slade? In St. Mary Mead, we had 2 bakers who vied for the best bread. Their rivalry spurred them to greatness, but it also led to mischief. Did you and Dr. Baxter ever engage in such games?" Slade's smile tightened, though his tone remained light. "Mischief? I'm too old for that, Miss Marple. We competed, sure, expeditions, papers, lectures, but I play fair. Baxter's death is a tragedy, not a victory for me." She nodded, her needles resuming their click as she retrieved her knitting from her bag. "Of course," she said, "though I've heard you're fond of wandering at night, studying the stars. A curious habit, in a camp so tense. Were you out the night, Doctor? Baxter died?" Slade's fingers stilled on his knife, his eyes narrowing slightly. "You're a sharp one," he said, his smile returning but less certain. "Yes, I was out. The stars clear my head, help me think. This jungle, it's suffocating sometimes. But I didn't go near Baxter's tent, if that's what you're wondering." Miss Marple's smile remained serene, but her mind noted the quick deflection, the way his charm faltered under scrutiny. She thought of a saint, Mary Mead's solicitor, who had used his silver tongue to mask a theft, his confidence undone by a single careless lie. "I'm sure you didn't," she said, "though Juan mentioned seeing you with a bundle that night. Supplies, perhaps?" Slade's laugh was sharp, his eyes flicking toward the fire. "Juan sees shadows and calls them ghosts," he said. "I carry all sorts of things, maps, tools, nothing sinister, I assure you." She thanked him, her mind cataloging his responses, the practiced charm, the vague answers, the subtle tension in his posture. As she returned to the awning, Sir Henry was waiting, his notebook open. "Well?" he asked, his voice eager. "Mr. Slade is a man who knows how to steer a conversation," she said, settling onto her stool. "He admits to being out that night, but his reasons are vague. That bundle Juan saw, it could be nothing, or it could be everything. We need more." Determined to probe further, Miss Marple sought out Clara Wentworth, who was now sipping tea by the fire, her eyes distant. "Doctor." "Wentworth," Miss Marple began, her tone warm. "You and Mr. Slade must have crossed paths often, both being scholars of sorts. Did he ever speak of Doctor Baxter, perhaps in a moment of candor?" Clara's lips tightened, her fingers gripping her mug. "Slade's no scholar," she said, her voice sharp. "He's an opportunist. A few years ago, he tried to steal Baxter's research during a joint expedition in Peru. Notes, maps, he'd have claimed it all if Baxter hadn't caught him. They've been at odds ever since." Miss Marple's eyebrows lifted slightly, her mind noting the depth of the rivalry. "That's most enlightening," she said. "In St. Mary Mead, a young artist once tried to pass off another's work as his own. It caused quite a scandal. Did Mr. Slade resent Dr. Baxter's success with the temple map?" Clara nodded, her eyes flashing. "Resent? He was furious. Slade's career has been slipping. Fewer expeditions, fewer headlines. Baxter's find would have finished him." Miss Marple thanked her, her thoughts racing. Slade's rivalry was deeper than she had suspected, a motive rooted in professional survival. She recalled a saint, Mary Mead, grocer, who had sabotaged a rival's shop to save his own, his desperation masked by a friendly facade. Slade's charm, she sensed, was a similar mask, hiding a heart that burned with ambition. Returning to Sir Henry, she shared Clara's revelation. "Slade's got a history of underhanded dealings," Sir Henry said, scribbling furiously. "That bundle, his nighttime wanderings, this old feud, it's piling up against him." Miss Marple's needles clicked steadily, her expression calm but her mind sharp. "It is, Henry, but we must be cautious. Slade's clever, and clever men don't leave obvious trails. The scarf, the knot, the boot print, they may point to him, or they may be a frame to divert us." As the camp settled into the night, the fire casting flickering shadows across the tents, Miss Marple watched Slade, who had resumed his whittling, his smile as polished as ever. The jungle's darkness seemed to mirror the shadows in his heart, and she knew the truth was close, hidden behind his charm, like a secret behind a St. Mary Mead smile. "Charm can blind, Henry," she murmured, "but it cannot hide forever." Chapter 9. The Temple's Lure. The dawn broke over the jungle with a golden haze, the air thick with the scent of damp earth and blooming orchids. The expedition camp stirred slowly, its inhabitants moving with the sluggishness of those weighed down by heat and suspicion. Miss Jane Marple sat beneath the canvas awning, her knitting needles clicking in their familiar rhythm, though her thoughts were consumed by the intricate puzzle of Dr. Ernest Baxter's murder. 6 nights had passed since the explorer was found strangled in his tent with a silk scarf, and the clues, muddy boot print, sailor's knot, muttered voice, rustle in the ferns, and Victor Slade's nocturnal bundle, formed a pattern that was tantalizingly close to revealing the truth. Today, her focus turned to the heart of the expedition, the lost temple, whose promise of wealth and glory had drawn this fractious group to the jungle's depths. Sir Henry Clithering joined her, his face etched with the exhaustion of their relentless investigation. He carried a folded piece of parchment, its edges worn from handling, and his eyes held a spark of renewed determination. "Jane," he said, lowering his voice as Diego Alvarez passed with a bundle of firewood, "I've been studying Baxter's map. It's the key to this whole affair, I'm sure of it. The temple's location, hidden in a valley beyond the river, drove Baxter, and I'd wager it drove his killer, too." Miss Marple's needles paused, her mild gaze meeting his. "A prize like that, Henry, stirs the heart like nothing else," she said softly. "In St. Mary Mead, I once saw a quiet gardener turn ruthless over a rare rose bush, all for the glory of a village prize. The temple's lure is far greater: wealth, fame, legacy. We must see how it pulled at each of them." Sir Henry unfolded the map, revealing a series of cryptic symbols and hand-drawn lines that traced a path through the jungle's labyrinth. The camp was quieter than usual, the weight of Baxter's absence palpable. Diego was now sharpening a machete, his movements precise, but his eyes distant. Dr. Clara Wentworth sat at her makeshift desk, her notebook open but her pencil idle, her sharp features shadowed by thought. Reginald Hawthorne stood near the cook tent, his booming voice subdued as he spoke to Juan, the porter. Victor Slade, ever watchful, leaned against a tree, his pocket-knife glinting as he carved intricate patterns into a stick. Miss Marple leaned closer to examine the map, her keen eyes tracing the faded ink. "These symbols," she said, "they're not unlike the codes in a St. Mary Mead puzzle book, meant to conceal as much as reveal. Dr. Baxter must have guarded this closely. Sir Henry nodded. He did. Kept it locked in his trunk, only showed it to me once. Said it was his legacy, the find that would cement his name. Whoever killed him might have wanted the map, or wanted to stop him from reaching the temple. Miss Marple's thoughts turned to the suspects, each drawn to the temple for their own reasons. Diego, with his pride in his heritage, saw the temple as sacred, its treasures a part of his people's history. Clara, driven by scientific ambition, sought the glory of new discoveries, her botanical studies intertwined with the temple's legend. Hawthorne, with his financial stakes, dreamed of artifacts that would fill his coffers. Slade, whose career hung by a thread, needed the temple's fame to restore his name. The map, she realized, was a mirror reflecting their deepest desires, and perhaps their darkest impulses. Determined to explore this lure, Miss Marple approached Clara Wentworth, who looked up with a flicker of irritation as she neared. "Doctor?" "Wentworth," Miss Marple began, her voice warm. "This temple must be a marvel, even to a scientist like you. Did Dr. Baxter ever share his map, perhaps to discuss its botanical significance?" Clara's eyes narrowed, her fingers tightening on her pencil. "He shared it once," she said, her tone clipped. "Showed me the valley's location, said it might hold rare plants, but he cared more for the artifacts than my work. He'd have stripped the place bare for his museums, leaving nothing for science." Miss Marple nodded, her expression sympathetic. "That must have been frustrating," she said. "In St. Mary Mead, a botanist once clashed with a collector over a rare orchid. It led to quite a feud. Did you ever feel the temple's lure yourself?" Clara's gaze softened, a hint of passion breaking through her reserve. "Of course I did," she admitted. "A new ecosystem, untouched for centuries. It's a scientist's dream. But Baxter would have taken the credit, like always. I wanted my name on those discoveries, not his." Miss Marple thanked her, noting the fire in Clara's eyes, the way her ambition mirrored Baxter's own. She thought of a saint. Mary Mead scholar who had sabotaged a rival's manuscript to claim academic glory, her motive rooted in a hunger for recognition. Clara's desire for the temple's secrets was a powerful thread, but was it murderous? Next, she sought out Diego Alvarez, finding him by the stream, testing the rope bridge he had repaired. His dark eyes met hers warily as she approached, her smile disarming. "Mr. Alvarez," she said, "this temple must hold great meaning for your people. Did Dr. Baxter's plans for it ever trouble you deeply?" Diego's hands stilled on the rope, his jaw tightening. "Trouble me?" he said, his voice low. "It's our history, Senora, our sacred place. My grandfather told stories of its guardians, spirits that watch over it. Baxter wanted to plunder it, sell its treasures to foreigners. I told him it was wrong, but he wouldn't listen." Miss Marple's eyes twinkled with understanding. "That must have been painful," she said. "In St. Mary Mead, a farmer once fought to protect an ancient oak from being felled. His passion was fierce. Did you ever see the map? Perhaps to guide him?" Diego shook his head, his expression guarded. "He showed it to me once, to prove he didn't need my knowledge. I saw the valley, the paths. I could have led him there, but he trusted his paper more than me." She thanked him, her mind noting his protective fervor, the way his hands gripped the rope as if anchoring his pride. She recalled a saint, Mary Mead villager who had vandalized a developer's plans to save a historic well, his motive rooted in heritage rather than greed. Diego's connection to the temple was deep, But did it drive him to kill? Miss Marple then approached Reginald Hawthorne, who was inspecting a crate of supplies, his gold watch glinting in the sunlight. His jovial mask was in place, but his eyes were wary as she greeted him. "Mr. Hawthorne," she said, "the temple must be a thrilling prospect for you. Such treasures, quite a return on your investment." Hawthorne's laugh was hearty, though it rang hollow. "Thrilling, yes," he said, puffing on a cigar. "Gold, jewels, statues, collectors will pay a fortune. Baxter's map was my ticket to millions, Miss Marple." She tilted her head, her smile polite. "And now, without him? It must be a worry, with so much at stake." Hawthorne's fingers twitched, his cigar smoke curling upward. "A worry, sure, but we'll manage. Diego knows the way, and the map's safe. I'll see this through for Baxter's sake, and mine." Miss Marple nodded, noting the strain in his voice, the way his wealth seemed a fragile facade. She thought of a saint, Mary Mead merchant whose investments had crumbled, his desperation hidden behind bravado. Hawthorne's stake in the temple was clear, but was it worth a man's life? Finally, she approached Victor Slade, who was sketching the map's symbols in a notebook, his movements precise. His smile flashed as she neared, though his eyes were cautious. "Mr. Slade," she said, "the temple must be a siren's call for an explorer like you. Did Dr. Baxter's map ever tempt you?" Slade's laugh was smooth, his knife pausing in its carving. "Tempt me? Of course, Miss Marple. It's the find of a lifetime. Baxter and I were rivals, but I'd have given my right arm to see that valley first. His map was a masterpiece. Too bad he won't see the glory." Miss Marple's needles clicked softly, her gaze steady. "A pity, indeed," she said. "In St. Mary Mead, 2 painters competed for a prize, and one resorted to sabotage. Did you ever see the map, perhaps to compare notes?" Slade's smile tightened, his eyes narrowing. "I saw it once, from a distance. Baxter wasn't one to share. But I've got my own maps, my own plans. I don't need his." She thanked him, her mind noting his evasive charm, the way he deflected with ease. She recalled a saint, Mary Mead charmer who had stolen a rival's designs, his ambition cloaked in smiles. Slade's hunger for the temple's fame was palpable, and his fading career made it a desperate need. Returning to Sir Henry, she shared her findings. "The temple's lure is strong," she said, her needles clicking. "Diego's pride, Clara's ambition, Hawthorne's greed, Slade's desperation, each is drawn to it, and Baxter's map was the key. But only one acted." Sir Henry frowned, studying the map. "It's a motive for all of them, Jane, but the scarf, the knot, those point to someone cunning." Miss Marple's smile was serene, her mind weaving the temple's lure into the pattern of clues. "Cunning, yes, Henry, but the truth is near. In St. Mary Mead, a stolen map once led me to a thief's heart. This map will lead us to a killer's." The camp settled into the morning's heat, the jungle's pulse echoing the tension within. Miss Marple's knitting continued, a steady rhythm against the lure of the temple, and she knew the truth was waiting, hidden in its ancient shadows. Chapter 10. The Scarf's Owner. The jungle's morning light filtered through the dense canopy, casting a dappled glow over the expedition camp, where the air hummed with the restless energy of insects and the faint rustle of leaves. Miss Jane Marple sat beneath the canvas awning, her knitting needles moving with their steady, soothing click, though her mind was a whirl of clues and suspicions. 7 nights had passed since Dr. Ernest Baxter was found strangled in his tent with a silk scarf, its vibrant parrot embroidery a stark contrast to the grim scene. The muddy boot print, the sailor's knot, the muttered voice, the rustle in the ferns. Victor Slade's bundle and the temple's lure had woven a complex tapestry, but the scarf itself remained a nagging enigma, a delicate clue that seemed to point everywhere and nowhere. Today, Miss Marple resolved to uncover its owner, sensing it was the key to unraveling the murder. Sir Henry Clithering joined her, his face lined with the strain of their relentless investigation, his notebook now a tattered chronicle of their efforts. He carried a tin mug of coffee, its bitter scent mingling with the jungle's earthy tang, and his eyes held a flicker of hope as he settled beside her. "Jane," he said, keeping his voice low, "that scarf keeps circling back in my mind. It's too refined for this place. Silk, embroidered, costly. It's got to belong to someone here, or it was brought to frame someone. Clara's the obvious choice, being the only woman, but I can't shake the feeling it's a misdirection." Miss Marple's needles paused, her mild gaze drifting across the camp, where the suspects moved through their morning tasks with guarded unease. "The scarf is a puzzle, Henry," she said softly. "In St. Mary Mead, I once solved a theft because a lace handkerchief was left at the scene, deliberately placed to implicate an innocent girl. This scarf, with its parrots, is a statement, either of ownership or deceit. We must find its truth." The camp was a study in tension. Diego Alvarez was checking the rope bridge, his hands deft but his eyes wary. Dr. Clara Wentworth sat at her makeshift desk, her notebook open but untouched, her sharp features etched with fatigue. Reginald Hawthorne stood near the cook tent, his gold watch glinting as he gestured animatedly to Juan, the porter. Victor Slade, ever the restless one, was sketching in a notebook near his tent, his polished smile flashing as he caught Miss Marple's gaze. The scarf, she knew, was a thread that tied them all together, and she was determined to trace it to its source. She began with Clara Wentworth, approaching her with the gentle demeanor of a village confidant. Clara looked up, her eyes narrowing slightly, but she softened under Miss Marple's warm smile. "Dr. Wentworth," Miss Marple said, settling onto a stool beside her. "I've been thinking about that dreadful scarf, the one used in poor Dr. Baxter's murder. It's such a striking thing. With those lovely parrots. Have you ever owned anything like it? Perhaps something sentimental?" Clara's fingers tightened on her pencil, her face paling. "Sentimental?" she said, her voice sharp but trembling. "No, Miss Marple, I don't bother with such things. Silk scarves are impractical here. Cotton's what I use. But I did have one like it, a gift from a colleague in London. It was stolen from my tent a few days before the murder." Miss Marple's eyebrows lifted slightly, her expression one of quiet concern. "Stolen? That's most curious, my dear. In St. Mary Mead, a stolen brooch once led me to a thief who meant to cast suspicion on another. Did you notice anything odd? Perhaps someone near your tent?" Clara hesitated, her eyes darting toward Slade's tent. "I didn't see anyone," she said, "but my trunk was disturbed, things out of place. I thought it was Juan, tidying up, but he swore he hadn't touched it." Miss Marple nodded, her mind noting the tremor in Clara's voice, the genuine distress in her eyes. She recalled a saint, Mary Mead widow, who had lost a cherished locket, her grief revealing her truthfulness. Clara's claim of theft rang true, but it raised a new question. Who had taken the scarf, and why? "Thank you, my dear," she said, patting Clara's hand. "You've been most helpful." Next, she approached Juan, finding him washing dishes by the stream, his nervous demeanor softening under her grandmotherly approach. "Juan," she said, her voice conspiratorial, "you're so observant, always seeing what others miss. Dr. Wentworth mentioned a scarf stolen from her tent. Did you ever see it? Perhaps in someone else's possession?" Juan's hands paused in the water, his eyes wide with fear. "No, Senora," he whispered, glancing toward the camp. "I never saw it, but I saw Senor Slade near Dr. Wentworth's tent a few days before. He was quick, like he didn't want to be seen. I thought he was just passing by." Miss Marple's smile was reassuring, though her mind raced. "You're a good lad, Juan. Keep this between us, won't you?" She moved on to Reginald Hawthorne, who was inspecting a crate of supplies, his linen suit creased but his gold watch gleaming. His jovial mask was in place, but his eyes were wary as she approached. "Mr. Hawthorne," she said, her tone warm, "that scarf used in the murder. It's such an odd thing to find here. Have you ever seen one like it, perhaps in London or among the camp's supplies?" Hawthorne's laugh was loud, but his fingers twitched around his cigar. "A scarf? Not my style, Miss Marple," he said. "Silks for ladies or dandies, not a man like me. I stick to practical things, boots, belts, whiskey. Never saw it before the constable showed it." Miss Marple nodded, noting the forced cheer, the way his eyes avoided hers. She thought of a saint. Mary Mead merchant who had lied about a stolen watch, his bluster betraying his guilt. Hawthorne's denial was too quick, too emphatic, but it lacked the weight of truth. "Of course," she said. "It's just so curious, such a fine thing in a rough place." Finally, she approached Diego Alvarez, who was coiling ropes near the supply tent, his dark eyes guarded. "Mr. Alvarez," she said, her smile disarming, "you know this camp so well. That silk scarf. Have you ever seen anything like it, perhaps among Dr. Wentworth's things or elsewhere?" Diego's hands stilled, his gaze narrowing. "A scarf like that?" "No, Senora," he said. "It's not for the jungle. Dr. Wentworth keeps her things simple, like me. If it was hers, someone took it to make trouble." Miss Marple thanked him, her mind noting his quick defense of Clara, the way his eyes flicked toward Slade's tent. She recalled a saint, Mary Mead farmer who had protected a friend by deflecting suspicion, his loyalty masking his own secrets. Diego's words suggested he suspected someone, perhaps Slade, but his motives remained unclear. Returning to the awning, she shared her findings with Sir Henry, who frowned, his notebook open. "Clara's scarf was stolen," he said, "and Juan saw Slade near her tent. That's damning, Jane. He could have taken it to frame her." Miss Marple's needles clicked steadily, her expression serene, but her mind sharp. "It's possible, Henry," she said, "but a stolen scarf suggests premeditation, a plan to mislead. In St. Mary Mead, a stolen necklace once pointed to a cunning thief who wanted another blamed. Slade's cunning fits, but we must be sure." She glanced toward Slade, who was now sharpening his knife, his smile as polished as ever. The scarf's theft, Juan's sighting, Clara's distress, they all pointed to a deliberate act, a killer who had planned not just murder, but deception. She thought of a saint, Mary Mead seamstress, who had used a stolen ribbon to frame a rival, her cunning undone by a single witness. "The scarf's owner is a victim, Henry," she murmured, "but its thief is our killer. We're close now." The camp hummed with the jungle's restless pulse and Miss Marple's knitting continued, a steady rhythm against the growing clarity of the truth. The scarf's tale was nearly told, and she was determined to follow its final thread to the heart of the crime. Chapter 11. The Final Thread. The jungle's evening air was thick with the scent of damp earth and the hum of nocturnal life, the lanterns casting a flickering glow across the expedition camp. 8 nights had passed since Dr. Ernest Baxter was found strangled in his tent with a silk scarf, and the web of clues, muddy boot print, sailor's knot, muttered voice, rustle in the ferns, Victor Slade's bundle, and the stolen scarf, had tightened around the suspects. Miss Jane Marple sat beneath the canvas awning, her knitting needles still, her mild eyes sharp with the clarity of a mind that had pieced together the pattern of the crime. Tonight, she knew, was the moment to unravel the final thread and name the killer. Sir Henry Clithering joined her, his face weary, but his eyes alight with anticipation. He clutched his tattered notebook, its pages filled with the fragments of their investigation, and his voice was low as he spoke. "Jane," he said, "we've got enough to make a move. The scarf, stolen from Clara, Juan's sighting of Slade, Diego's knots, Hawthorne's money troubles, it's all pointing somewhere. I trust you've seen the pattern?" Miss Marple's lips curved in a faint smile, her gaze sweeping the camp. "The pattern is clear, Henry," she said softly. "In St. Mary Mead, I once solved a murder by noticing a single mismatched button. The smallest threads, when woven together, tell the whole story. Tonight, we'll lay it bare." The camp was tense. The suspects gathered under the awning for dinner, their faces lit by the fire's glow. Diego Alvarez sat at the table's edge, his hands gripping a mug, his dark eyes wary. Dr. Clara Wentworth, her notebook absent, stared into her plate, her sharp features drawn with strain. Reginald Hawthorne, his jovial mask fraying, sipped whiskey, his gold watch glinting. Victor Slade, ever composed, leaned back in his chair, his smile polished, but his eyes watchful. Juan, the porter, served coffee, his nervous glances darting between them. Miss Marple rose, her small figure commanding attention despite its unassuming air. She folded her knitting and placed it in her bag, her voice gentle but firm as she addressed the group. "Good evening," she said. "I've been thinking about poor Dr. Baxter and how his death has cast such a shadow over this camp. Murder, you see, is a human act, driven by human passions, pride, greed, ambition, fear. In my village, St. Mary Mead, I've seen these passions play out in small ways, but here, in the jungle, they burn brighter." The group stirred, their eyes fixed on her, some with curiosity, others with unease. She continued, her tone conversational, as if sharing a village tale. "Doctor, Baxter's discovery of the temple map stirred those passions. Diego, you resented his dismissal of your heritage, your sacred places. Clara, you fought for your rightful credit, stolen by his ambition. Mr. Hawthorne, your fortune rested on his success, a heavy burden. And Mr. Slade, your fading career was threatened by his triumph. Each of you had reason to wish him gone." Diego's hands tightened, Clara's face paled, Hawthorne's glass shook slightly, and Slade's smile flickered. Miss Marple's eyes twinkled, her voice steady. "But murder requires more than motive. It requires opportunity, cunning, and a cold heart. The silk scarf, stolen from Clara's tent, was a clever touch, meant to point to her. The sailor's knot, expertly tied, suggested skill with ropes. The muddy boot print, the muttered voice, the rustle in the ferns, all pointed to a killer who moved in the night, unseen but not unnoticed. She paused, her gaze settling on Slade, who met it with a raised eyebrow, his charm intact. "Mr. Slade," she said, "you're a man of experience, skilled in many things, sailing, exploring, surviving. You knew Dr. Baxter's habits, his nightly routine. You were seen near his tent with a bundle the night he died, and Clara's scarf, stolen days before from her tent where Juan saw you lingering." Slade's smile tightened, his voice smooth but edged. "You're weaving a fine tale, Miss Marple, but it's just that, a tale. I wander at night, yes, for the stars. The bundle, supplies, nothing more. And Clara's scarf? I've never touched it." Miss Marple nodded, her expression serene. "So you say. But small things betray us, Mr. Slade. In St. Mary Mead, a thief was caught because he left a cigarette stub in a garden. Near Dr. Baxter's tent, I found a cigarette butt. Your brand, I believe. And the boot print, smaller than Dr. Baxter's, matches the boots you wear. You see, you planned carefully, stealing the scarf to frame Clara, using your sailor's knot to secure it, slipping into his tent while he slept. But you overlooked the small things." Slade's face paled, his charm crumbling. "This is nonsense," he said, his voice rising. "You've no proof, just guesses." Miss Marple's voice remained calm, her eyes steady. "Proof is in the pattern, Mr. Slade. Your rivalry with Dr. Baxter was no secret. Clara told me of your attempt to steal his research years ago. His temple find would have ended your career, left you forgotten. You couldn't let that happen. So you acted, with cunning and care, but not enough care. The camp was silent, the jungle's hum the only sound. Diego's eyes widened, Clara's hand flew to her mouth, Hawthorne's glass clattered to the table. Slade rose, his fists clenched, his eyes darting toward the jungle's edge. "You're wrong," he said, his voice hoarse. "I didn't—" He lunged toward the darkness, but Diego and Juan were faster, their hands seizing his arms. Sir Henry stepped forward, his voice firm. "Enough, Slade. You'll answer to the authorities." As Slade struggled, his defiance fading, Miss Marple sat back, her knitting resumed, its click a quiet counterpoint to the chaos. Clara wept softly, her relief palpable. Hawthorne mopped his brow, his bluster gone. Diego released Slade, his expression a mix of anger and vindication. Sir Henry turned to Miss Marple, his voice filled with awe. "You did it, Jane. Those small things, cigarette, boot print, scarf, they told the story." Miss Marple's smile was serene, her needles steady. "Small things always do, Henry. In St. Mary Mead, a single thread unraveled a murder. Here, it was the same." The jungle night closed in, its shadows no longer hiding the truth. The final thread had been pulled, and the killer stood revealed, caught in the pattern Miss Marple had so carefully woven. Chapter 12. The Jungle's Peace. The jungle exhaled a soft, humid breath as dawn broke over the expedition camp, its golden light filtering through the dense canopy to bathe the clearing in a gentle glow. The air was alive with the chatter of birds and the rustle of leaves, a stark contrast to the tension that had gripped the camp for 9 days since Dr. Ernest Baxter's murder. Miss Jane Marple sat beneath the canvas awning, her knitting needles moving with their familiar rhythm, though her small canvas bag now held the completed scarf, a quiet testament to her steady presence. Victor Slade, unmasked as the killer the previous night, had been taken away by the local constable, his charm shattered and his fate sealed. The camp, though still shaken, seemed to breathe easier, as if the jungle itself had exhaled a long-held secret. Sir Henry Clithering joined her, his face weary but relieved, his tattered notebook tucked under his arm. He carried a tin mug of tea, its steam curling into the morning air, and his eyes held a mix of admiration and exhaustion as he settled beside her. "Jane," he said, his voice low, "you've done it again." Slade's confession came at dawn. He admitted to stealing Clara's scarf, planning the murder to stop Baxter's triumph. The boot print, the cigarette, your sharp eyes, it all came together. "I don't know how you do it." Miss Marple's needles paused, her mild gaze drifting across the camp, where the remaining members moved with a tentative sense of purpose. "It's no great mystery, Henry," she said softly. "In St. Mary Mead, I learned that people are much the same, whether in a village or a jungle. Their hearts betray them in small ways. A glance, a word, a cigarette left carelessly behind. We simply follow those signs to the truth." The camp was slowly returning to its routine. Diego Alvarez was checking the rope bridge, his hands deft but his expression lighter, as if a weight had lifted. Dr. Clara Wentworth sat at her makeshift desk, her notebook open, her pencil moving with renewed vigor as she catalogued her specimens. Reginald Hawthorne stood near the cook tent, his gold watch glinting, but his booming voice subdued, replaced by a quiet conversation with Juan, the porter, who nodded with less fear than before. The shadow of suspicion had lifted, and the camp seemed to pulse with a fragile hope. Miss Marple's thoughts turned to the aftermath. Clara, cleared of suspicion, had wept openly after Slade's unmasking, her relief tempered by grief for Baxter, whose ambition had sparked her own. "I'll continue the work," she had told Miss Marple, her voice firm. "Not for fame, but for science. Baxter would have wanted that in his better moments." Miss Marple had nodded, seeing in Clara the resolve of a St. Mary Mead schoolteacher who had rebuilt her life after a scandal. Hawthorne, his financial stakes still intact, had pledged to fund the expedition's continuation, vowing to honor Baxter's memory. "We'll find that temple," he had said, his bluster softened by sincerity. "For Baxter, and for all of us." Miss Marple had smiled, noting the shift in his demeanor, reminiscent of a St. Mary Mead merchant who had learned humility after a brush with ruin. Diego, vindicated and free of suspicion, had approached Miss Marple at dawn, his dark eyes earnest. "You saw the truth, Señora," he had said, his voice thick with gratitude. "I thought the jungle would hide it, but you found it." He had offered to guide the team to the temple, his pride in his heritage now a source of strength rather than resentment. Miss Marple had thanked him, seeing in him the quiet dignity of a St. Mary Mead gardener who had protected his village's legacy. Juan, the nervous porter, had lingered near her as she packed her knitting, his eyes wide with awe. "You're like a spirit of the jungle, Señora," he had whispered. "You see what's hidden." Miss Marple had chuckled, patting his arm, and thought of a St. Mary Mead boy who had once called her a witch for solving a theft with a single question. As the camp prepared to move forward, Sir Henry leaned closer, his voice tinged with wonder. "You see what others miss, Jane," he said. "The scarf, the knot, the boot print, those were nothing to us, but everything to you. How do you do it?" Miss Marple's smile was serene, her gaze drifting to the jungle's green depths. "People are the same everywhere, Henry," she said. "In St. Mary Mead, I learned to watch their habits, their fears, their silences. A jungle may be wilder than a village, but the human heart beats the same. It tells its story if you listen. She rose, her small figure moving with quiet grace as she prepared to depart. The expedition would continue, guided by Diego, fueled by Clara's science and Hawthorne's ambition, but Miss Marple's work was done. She thought of St. Mary Mead, with its tidy cottages and hidden secrets, and felt a pang of longing for its familiar rhythms. The jungle had tested her, but it had also affirmed what she had always known, that truth, like a well-knit scarf, emerges from the careful weaving of small threads. Sir Henry escorted her to the edge of the camp, where a boat waited to carry her downriver to the nearest village. "You'll be missed, Jane," he said, his voice warm. "This camp owes you more than it can repay." Miss Marple's eyes twinkled as she stepped into the boat, her canvas bag in hand. "Nonsense, Henry," she said. "I've only done what any village spinster might, watched, listened, and followed the threads. Take care, and do right if you find that temple." As the boat glided away, the jungle's chorus enveloped her, a symphony of life that seemed to echo the peace she had restored. The camp faded into the green haze, its secrets laid bare, its heart lighter. Miss Marple settled back, her thoughts drifting to St. Mary Mead, where new mysteries, no doubt, awaited her sharp eyes and steady hands.